What's up, everybody? Welcome back. We're here with some more NFL DFS picks and lineup advice, this time for the single game showdown slate on DraftKings and FanDuel. Thursday Night Football, Seattle Seahawks and the Dallas Cowboys. Welcome, I'm Brian Jester, co-founder here at Occupy Fantasy, single game $1 million winner. Here to give you all the strategies you need for tonight's game. We'll talk about the injuries that impact the slate, low-risk lineup construction tips, and strategies to win the biggest contest on both DraftKings and FanDuel. Before we jump into it, I do want to highlight a couple screenshots from Monday night where I don't want to pat myself on the back too hard, but we couldn't have nailed the slate any more than we did in Monday's video and in Monday's content, where talked about playing the running back twos over the running back ones. This was one of my small field lineups that I played. This was the $150 power sweep. This lineup basically swept everything I entered it into. Playing Roshan Johnson over Khalil Herbert. Talked about playing the defenses over the kickers. Bears defense put up 14 points. Not playing the quarterbacks at captain, playing the lower owned receivers, DJ Moore. Basically textbook from what we talked about in the video, and even more strategies that we highlighted in our daily plug at occupyfantasy.com. Basically, I put all those rules and ideas into our lineup builder, ran a bunch of lineups, and I looked at which popped out at the top of our projections, looked at some ownership numbers, put in some rules, and really just overall great slate. Also want to give a shout out to one of our YouTube viewers here, Kyle, who we've had a lot of great discussions, by the way, in our Discord server the last couple of days about contest selection. Not sure this is necessarily the best contest selection, but either way, using the strategies we talked about in the video, Kyle took down a solo victory in the $10 single entry on FanDuel on Monday for a nice little $10 into $1,000 ROI. So shout out to you, Kyle, if you're watching today. Congrats. Good work. But now let's move on to today's slate because memories are short-lived in DFS. So let's talk about today's game, and we'll start with the injuries. Really not much to talk about, honestly. Dallas, their entire team is fully healthy. Nobody is on the injury report. Nothing to really talk about here. As far as playing time and usage in recent games, there have been some blowouts, especially in the fourth quarter. So some of the usage is a little bit off, but really Dallas still playing for a 1 seed, still playing for a bye. They are not going to change what they've been doing. So all their pricing should be pretty efficient on both sides. For Seattle, Kenneth Walker remains out, dealing with that oblique injury. He is doubtful tonight. He's not going to play. He didn't practice all week. Didn't practice all of last week. So we get Zach Charbonnet once again. He is $6,800 on DraftKings, 11.5 on FanDuel, and his workload has been outstanding. If you look at the last two games that Sharp has played, Walker only played 7 snaps 2 weeks ago when he was injured. But if you look at last week specifically, Zach Charbonnet, 49 of the 56 snaps for Seattle. DJ Dallas, their backup, played just 7 snaps. So just an outstanding workload for Zach Charbonnet. Far too underpriced on both sides. Yes, tough matchup. Yes, big spread as an underdog, but the usage is too good to be ignored, especially when he's playing in passing situations as well. On Seattle's offensive line, they're losing guard Phil Haynes, but they're getting back Abe Lucas, the guy, their offensive tackle who hasn't played since week 1. So they'll shuffle around a little bit. So while they did lose their guard from last week, starting guard from last week, last few weeks, should be an overall boost getting their week 1 starter back into the lineup. Sounds like Jason Peters, the 55-year-old man, is going to slide into right guard. Either way, it should be a nice little boost for Seattle's offensive line tonight. Will Dissly, just one quick mark. He is questionable. Their number 2, number 3 tight end. Let's find him. He is $1,400. Full practice yesterday. We expect him to play and continue their 3-man rotation at tight end. All right. Now let's discuss low-risk contests, 50-50s, double-ups, head-to-heads. Honestly, I feel like this slate is a little bit better, especially on DraftKings, for low-risk contests than high-risk contests, and we'll get into why that is. But if you read our showdown guide, which, by the way, if you haven't already, make sure you check it out. People have been buying that left and right the past, 2 weeks or so since watching these videos. And if you use code GUIDE50, you get an extra 50% off the already sale price. But talks about historical data, how to beat showdown contests. In there for the low-risk section, we talk about 2 strategies to beat low-risk contests: locking up all the scoring, playing both quarterbacks, both running backs when there are lead workhorses for both teams, and playing any obvious values. This slate, there are basically no obvious values on either site, and it makes the slate really tough. Fortunately, we do have 2 lead backs in Tony Pollard and Zach Charbonnet who see the vast majority of work for their teams. So if we played the both quarterback, both running back, lock up all the scoring strategy, that would be Dak Prescott, who's been just on an absolute heater lately, Tony Pollard, Geno Smith, and Zach Charbonnet. 38.50 left per player. Generally, this would be a great start to a low-risk lineup on DraftKings. We play the obvious value at 3K or below. However, that's not the case. We'll talk about these values in the high-risk section, but basically everyone below the kickers and defenses are just playing limited time, and no one is truly underpriced or mispriced for their role. Even just think of Brandon Powell on the Vikings slate, right? 2K was going to get 3 or 4 targets. That's underpriced. We don't really have that on this slate. It makes it extremely difficult to play values. So if you tried to play this way, you're going to have to play an uncomfortable spot in your final spot. Not sure that's the way to go. However, what you can do, you can move Dak to your flex. Let's play Dak here. You could put Charbonnet due to his insane usage and his underpricing at your captain spot. And that's $4,900 per player. You could play kickers and defenses if you want. Aubrey, 5K, that's kind of tough. The other way you could do it, you could captain a mid-range player, which I think will be somewhat popular, way more popular than it usually would be because of the lack of value on this slate. Let's say you captain Dallas's kicker, Aubrey. Generally not a strategy we talk about, but I think it's very viable on this slate. Now you put in Zach Charbonnet. 6K per player. You could play Njigba, Cowboys defense, Myers. This is a way to go, I think, tonight. Either way, you want to get both running backs, both quarterbacks in. Yes, it's a little scary fading CD Lamb, but historically, the top price stud wide receiver, the fade is scary, but it's the profitable way to go in low-risk contests on DraftKings. And he would have to put up 35 plus probably, and if someone captains him, you're probably dead anyways. But he would have to put up this 30-plus point performance that he did in week 8 through 10. If he just puts up 16s like he's done the last couple of weeks, he's not going to hurt you that bad. Even if he puts up 20, 25, it's not too bad. You can get away with the fade in low-risk contests. Now, FanDuel, it is much more difficult, as it normally is. No mispricings. Everyone is in the role that they should be. So Dak, Pollard, Geno, Sharp, just $2,500 left per player. Obviously, we can't do that. You have to make a decision now. Do you fade Tony Pollard, who has had a tough time scoring touchdowns this year? Do you fade a quarterback, which is tough given the scoring? Do you fade Charbonnet, who's underpriced at 11.5? It's really difficult to tell. I think most projection systems would say to fade Geno Smith here, and you pay $8,250 left per player. But you're leaving out one of these guys. You're fading CeeDee Lamb, which is fine on this slate. But I mean, even then, you have to play a sub 8K guy, and none of these guys are that great, right? Gallup, Dowdle, defense, it's pretty tough. It's a pretty clear fade for low-risk contests on FanDuel tonight. If you play both sides, keep your low-risk allocation to DraftKings only, unless something completely unexpected happens this afternoon. It is really difficult to make a low-risk lineup tonight. You could just go complete Dallas onslaught, fade Charbonnet and Geno, and you have a much more balanced lineup. You play Aubrey, Ferguson, Myers, Cowboys D. That's one way to go, but I'm not sure it's the best way tonight. It's really difficult to play low risk on FanDuel tonight. You guys know what it's time for now. The in-between low risk and high risk water sip. Let's get hydrated, and let's think about some GPP strategies for tonight to win the biggest prizes on both FanDuel and DraftKings. Then we'll talk about some contest selection too. All right, we're good to go now. Let's go over to DraftKings again. And like I said at the top of the show, we've been talking about contest selection a lot in our Discord server. If you're not already, make sure you're in there, occupyfantasy.com/Discord. Links in the description below. Showed my lineup yesterday. This is just a 296 player field. Yes, I would have done well in a lot of contests, a lot bigger contests, just because I got pretty much everything right with this lineup. But your margin for error is expanded when you play smaller contests, smaller GPPs, less than 500 players. So really advise, even in showdown contests, right? Unless you're 20 max and 150 max, and really look for these small field GPPs, you have much better chance of cashing and winning those contests. But anyways, let's talk about tonight instead. And with the lack of value on both sides, it makes it extremely difficult. And what's going to happen is if you just look at other industry optimizers, their top projected lineups are some combination of the studs and just a random punt play that isn't that great of a play that projects for like 1 or 2 points, right? So to me, this says that if you play large field GPPs, many 150 maxers will deploy this type of strategy, making it a pretty duped lineup construction where you play 3-4 guys from up here, one guy from the middle, and then one of these cheap 5% owned, 1% owned value plays that aren't expected to score much. And we're going to see a lot of competition if that lineup construction hits, is basically which cheap player can score the most points. Who gets the race to 5 points. Makes it extremely difficult. Now, as an overall strategy, it makes sense when there's little value to rotate the values through in your mass multi-entry contest, 20 max, 150 max, and pray that one of them gets there. But it is going to be popular tonight relatively. So even if you go that route, you still have to be creative with those lineups that you build. You can't build these max salary lineups that include someone like, I don't know, uh, who we got here? Jalen Brooks, DJ Dallas, Colby Parkinson, Jake Bobo, even Kenny McIntosh. Like he's getting some love and at the top of optimal lineups because he's $200, right? And he didn't even play a snap last week. So you still have to get different, play another low-owned play with it, leave some salary. It's a good strategy tonight, but you still have to be creative with the rest of your lineup in mass multi-entry contests. It is much more viable on FanDuel, where it won't be as popular. People will play more mid-range guys, and those guys that are 3K and below on DraftKings, 7K and below on FanDuel, and we'll talk about them here in a second. Let's lay out some of their paths to the optimal lineup. But much more viable on FanDuel, where you can play Dak, CD, Pollard at MVP, play a 1% flex guy. And again, you still have to get a little creative, or if not, you'll have tons of dupes, even with that type of lineup. But I think it's much more viable on FanDuel tonight. It is a strategy to use on a slate that is pretty tough for high-risk contests. Now, let's see here. Let's talk about those guys, those cheap guys, and let's see if any of them make more sense than the other on a night where it's so tough. All right. So if we start below the kickers, right? Rico Dowdle has been getting change of pace work behind Tony Pollard, has looked great doing it, has gotten some work in the red zone as recently as last week and as 2 weeks ago in that blowout versus the Giants. But last week saw the early touchdown against the Commanders. So going to get his 5 to 10 touches per game, more than likely. They've been somewhat high value, but he's $4,200, right? If he was $1,200, he would be the popular value. But at $4,200, he's way overpriced for a guy who's going to get 8 touches, 1, maybe 2 of which are through the passing game. So Dowdle overpriced, but he's going to have low ownership as a result. So maybe he's a low-owned pivot play in a Dallas-heavy, Dallas blowout type of lineup. Or in lineups where you don't play Pollard, and I'm not going to say the situation where it makes sense, but you don't have Pollard, but you have Dowdle. All right, Gallup, $3,800, has been splitting snaps with Jalen Tolbert. Surprisingly, their routes run have been relatively equal over the past couple of weeks. Similar pricing, and they're cannibalizing each other. And it's not like they're getting tons of targets, right? So Tolbert, we got 3 to 5 targets isn't bad for a 3K player. I got to say, right? This isn't much different than Brandon Powell in recent weeks because we've seen so many Vikings showdown slates. So Tolbert's probably the best option of the group at 3K. Gallup, similar, a little more volatile, 3 to 5 targets, but he's $800 more expensive. So Tolbert is the better option of those two. Noah Fant running routes the most of Seattle tight ends, but good luck if you get more than 2 targets from Noah Fant. It makes it extremely difficult. He's splitting snaps and routes with Will Dissly and Colby Parkinson. Parkinson might get a target every other game. He's $800. Dissly, the better receiving tight end between he and Colby Parkinson. He might get a target or 2. And at $1,400, that might be enough if he gets 2 targets. But again, these aren't guys that are going to score 10-plus points outside of a random long touchdown. Who else we got down here? Let's keep looking. Kevontae Turpin. He might score on one of his 5 snaps. He'll probably get a touch or a target, but you need him to score. And while he's done it in 2 of the past 4 games, it's difficult to bank on that when he's getting 1 touch per game. Who else we got? Schoonmaker. Running more routes lately, around 10 routes per game. Not bad for an $1,800 tight end, but again, 1 to 2 targets. Nothing crazy. Jake Bobo, preseason legend, 1 to 2 targets per game. Wide receiver 4. DJ Dallas, 7 to 15 snaps as a backup running back. Makes sense as a chaos pivot against Zach Charbonnet. God forbid. Who else we got? Jalen Brooks. Blowout run against the Giants. 1 target last week against Washington. He's a blowout script play only. I mean, it's tough down here, guys. It's really tough to play anyone down here and expect more than 3 targets. Tolbert is the best option. We expect him to be a little popular, probably the most popular of this group, but it's not saying a lot. So all in all, this is one of the more difficult value slates we've had in the last few weeks and maybe all season long. All right, so how else can we get different then if we're not playing the values and we're not trying to compete with these guys that we hope to get 1 to 2 points? First option I would say is low-owned captains or MVPs, as we've talked about in recent videos. Super dehydrated today, apparently. DK Metcalf stands out as the best option. We have a 6% projected captain ownership on DraftKings, around the same on FanDuel as well. He is one of our underperforming wide receivers this week, For the uninitiated, those are guys who have seen a lot of opportunity in recent weeks, but haven't necessarily capitalized. Generally, those guys have big games in the future. Jordan Addison was an underperforming wide receiver leading into the Monday Night Showdown slate. If you watch the game, you probably see why he is underperforming. Had the wide open touchdown. Dobbs threw it out of bounds. He would have easily hit on his underperforming status. Alas, he remains underperforming. DK Metcalf has been getting tons of work lately. You look at 30 targets in the last 3 games, has just 42 fantasy points when he's expected to have scored 60 or more based on how he's been used. He is underperforming. Stud wide receiver who's underperforming, as low owned, as an underdog on a showdown slate. Perfect storm opportunity for DK Metcalf to play captain. He's one of our favorite captains tonight. Who else makes sense as a low owned captain? Lockett. Charbonnet is going to get more love because of the lack of value. We're going to see elevated captain ownership on guys like Lockett, Charbonnet, despite their underdog status, Smith and Jigba, kickers, defenses, just because that's going to be one way to avoid the values tonight. So they're going to have a little bit more than normal. If you think that's a unique way to go, you can, but understand you still have to be creative. You can't just jam it in there because that is something the field is going to be doing as well. All right, who else we got here? Let's talk about Brandon Cooks really quickly. 8K, certainly overpriced. He is one of our overperforming wide receivers. Not a list that we published, but these are guys who have been overperforming relative to expectations. His 35-point outburst against the Giants of Week 10 is the biggest contributor to that factor. But at 8K, he is overpriced for a guy who's going to see probably 5 targets. So we expect him to be under 20% owned. So in small field GPPs, you don't really want to play overpriced, high-priced guys. Historically has not been profitable. But for the largest GPPs, if he has an outburst like this, 35 points, even if he puts up 20 points at sub 20% ownership, that's a massive differentiator. All these other guys that are sub 20% are pretty terrible plays. At least Cooks is going to be on the field, has deep playability, can put up 20 points. So for large field GPPs, he's probably one of the best low-owned pivots. Small field GPPs, he's still probably too high-priced to make sense in those smaller contests. All right, any other ideas here? Yeah, okay, so typically we talk about this, and it's more of a hold your nose, this feels really gross to do it, is to go underdog heavy in your lineups. Here we expect the field, obviously, as Dallas are 9-point favorites, to play Dallas heavy lineups. 4 Cowboys in one lineup, 5 Cowboys in one lineup, 4 or 3 over on FanDuel. But tonight, it actually makes sense to actually play Seattle heavy. I mean, we saw it with the Bears, right? Most people played Vikings heavy or balanced. Bears heavy lineups, as mine did extremely well when it works out because of different paths to victory, whether it's concentrated scoring on Dallas side, whether it's underperforming by Dallas or overperforming by Seattle. It's possible for Seattle heavy lineups to be optimal, and you don't have to play any low-owned guys or get really crazy with your lineup. You already have leverage by playing more Seahawks than the field is actually doing. So if you play Seahawks captain and 2 other guys in the flex, or 4 total Seahawks, 5 Seahawks, it's going to be extremely rare for the field to do. And you can play mostly higher owned guys by doing that because it's not going to be that used by the field. And when the alternatives are playing super gross, low owned guys, playing worse captains, this option doesn't feel that bad. So Seattle heavy lineup is one of the best leverage and probably one of the more confident ways to play high-risk contests tonight, even in smaller GPPs. Because if Lamb gets all the scoring for Dallas or Pollard or Dak spreads it just around enough and Seattle keeps it competitive, then guys like Metcalf, Lockett, Charbonnet, Geno, kickers, defenses can mix in and end up with more balanced or even Seattle heavy winners in most GPPs. So overall, it's a really, really tough slate. I know I've said that a few times, but it's really difficult tonight. Any other takes? I mean, Aubrey on DraftKings, $4,800 for some reason, right? If you've been watching these videos, you've been playing, you know that most favored kickers have been more than 5K. We've even seen some $5,400 and $5,600 kickers. He's just $4,800. We expect him to be like 35% owned tonight, probably higher in smaller GPPs. And rightfully so, right? He projects really well as a big favorite at home. So you could play the Cowboys defense as a pivot. You could play Myers as a pivot. You could play the Seahawks defense as a pivot. And again, yes, cheap defenses typically don't project well. Dallas has allowed the least amount of fantasy points to opposing fantasy defenses this year. But defensive scoring is random. Kicker scoring is mostly random. Why not take the ownership break as a way to get different and play Seahawks defense or Myers? All it takes is 1 or 2 plays for those guys to become optimal. And that's another way to get different if you want to fade the chalky Aubrey and slightly less chalky, but still chalky Cowboys defense. So that'll do it for this video. For more in-depth information, make sure you check out our daily plug, OccupyFantasy.com. Has rankings for different contest types for both FanDuel and DraftKings, overall slate notes and different ideas for how to approach the slate, and lineup construction tips for 6 different contests between DraftKings and FanDuel to give you the best way to approach this slate. If you like to read it, you like to digest, it's the best way. Not everyone is video friendly. Some people want more information. Go check out our daily plug, OccupyFantasy.com. That'll be posted later this afternoon on Thursday. So make sure you check that out. Make sure you're subscribed here on the channel if you are not already. It's free to do so. You'll get notified when we go live, upload new videos. We have a 2-gamer coming up in the next week and a half, I believe. I think it's next Monday night. Not this upcoming Monday night. So we'll do a live stream for that with Jack. Make sure you're subscribed to get notified. Live streams for UFC, NFL, and NBA all throughout the rest of the week. Subscribing is the best way to get notified, show your support, and give us a thumbs up. Let's try to get to 200 likes once again. Just lets us know that you like the content and that we should continue to do these videos. As we wind down towards the end of the season, we do a lot of recapping and diving into the engagement with the channel, and the videos that get the most engagement, we typically want to run it back for the following season. So if you like these videos, give us a thumbs up, commenting, subscribing. That's the best way to let us know that, hey, keep doing these videos for next season as well. So Brian Jester for Occupy Fantasy, thank you for listening, and good luck in tonight's Seahawks and Cowboys showdown slate.